Imagine opening your mail today and finding a check for $166 billion from the IRS.
I mean, that would be a pretty good day.
Right. But now imagine finding out that the check isn't actually for you. It's going directly to the massive retail corporations that already overcharged you for your groceries and electronics all of last year.
Yeah, that's a slightly different feeling.
Exactly. So today we are looking at a version of Washington where the math is getting very, very creative. Welcome to today's deep dive. We have a really fascinating stack of reports from April 2026 to get through today.
I do, yeah.
And these were all published by an independent accountability journalism organization called Impeach 47.
Right, and I think we need to throw a massive, crucial disclaimer out there right at the top.
Please do.
So, Impeach 47, these sources we're looking at, they are highly politically charged, they're openly anti-authoritarian, and they carry a very specific, aggressive political agenda against the current administration.
Yeah, they pull no punches.
Right. So our job today is absolutely not to take their side or, endorse their specific viewpoints. We are not playing politics here.
Exactly. We're just strictly analytical today.
Right. We're just stripping away all the partisans' spin to look at the actual facts, the legislation, the court rulings, the documented proposals that they're reporting on. Because if we examine the underlying mechanics of these events, we can help you understand what is actually happening with your tax dollars and the legal system right now.
Yeah, and across all three of these separate reports, there is just this glaring theme that emerges. We are basically witnessing a masterclass in the transactional nature of power.
Oh, 100%.
It's all about, who pays the bill, who gets the actual benefits, and how the rules of fairness literally get rewritten for the players who have the most leverage. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
The first source details this really staggering financial maneuver. So Congress just passed legislation this month, April 2026, directing $166 billion in tariff refunds straight back to American corporations.
Yeah, and to understand the sheer magnitude of that number and, why this massive payout is happening right now, we have to look back at the supply chain mechanics from 2025. Right. So the administration put this new aggressive tariff regime into effect back then. And large importers, I mean, we're talking major retail chains, electronics, auto parts suppliers, big pharma, they had to pay these really heavy duties on incoming goods at the ports.
So they essentially had to pay a tax at the border just to get the shipping containers into the country.
Exactly. But then months later, the administration issued revised tariff schedules. They granted retroactive exemptions, which basically created this massive legal gray area.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so these corporations argued, hey, we overpaid under a regime that the government itself later altered. And this dispute went all the way up the chain.
Right to the Supreme Court.
Right. In February 2026, the Supreme Court ruled in this landmark case American Importers Coalition v. United States, and they declared that, yes, these corporations are legally entitled to refunds for those overcharges. But, the Supreme Court can't just magically wire billions of dollars. Congress had to pass what's called implementing legislation. It's a bill that officially appropriates the funds from the Treasury to pay off this court-mandated debt. And the Congressional Budget Office says that total liability is $166 billion.
Okay, so here is the brutal catch for you, the listener, in all of this. That money flows right back into the corporate ledgers. But those companies, they didn't just quietly eat the cost of those massive tariffs back in 2025.
No, of course not.
Right. They are incredibly efficient at protecting their profit margins. So they pass those costs directly onto you at the checkout line. Every single time you bought a new phone or clothes or food imports, that border tax was quietly baked right into the retail price you paid.
Yeah, and that's not just a theory. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell recently told the Senate Banking Committee that this specific tariff-driven inflation pushed the Consumer Price Index, which is, the official measure of your everyday goods, to a 2-year high.
Right. It hit 3.3%.
Exactly.
So while these mega corporations are getting $166 billion handed back to them, there is absolutely zero mechanism to get a refund for those artificially high prices you've been paying all year.
It's wild. And the political spin around this disconnect is just a fascinating study in economic messaging.
Oh, definitely.
You got Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, who sits on the House Oversight Committee. She actually voted for the refund bill. And her quote was that this is a necessary correction to protect American businesses from double taxation.
So her argument is totally anchored on just looking at the legal entity that originally wrote the check to the government.
Exactly. But then on the flip side, House Democrats were arguing that since everyday consumers absorb the actual economic blow of the tariffs, refunding only the corporate middlemen is basically a massive upward transfer of wealth.
Yeah.
They actually pushed to include consumer dividends,
Right.
but it failed. The bill passed largely along party lines, driven by the House Republican majority.
It's basically the equivalent of going out to dinner with a huge group of friends, right? You all agree to split this really expensive appetizer platter. Everyone chips in $20, and then one guy physically hands his credit card to the waiter to pay for it.
I love this analogy.
Right. And then later, the restaurant manager comes over, admits they actually overcharged for the platter, and he hands a $50 cash refund directly to the guy holding the credit card.
Yep.
And that guy just pockets the $50. The rest of the table gets absolutely nothing, even though everyone's $20 funded the meal in the first place.
Taking that a step further, the manager in your scenario, which would be the Supreme Court here, they aren't looking at who actually ate the food or who chipped in the cash. They're literally just looking at whose name is printed on the receipt.
But let me push back on this a little bit. Because legally speaking, if the corporate entity physically wrote the check to the Treasury, doesn't standard law dictate that the Treasury cuts the refund check to that exact same name? I mean, isn't that just basic accounting? How can we view this as some deliberate slight to consumers when the government is just executing a standard court order?
What's fascinating here is how the mechanics of the law and the reality of economics just exist in two totally separate universes.
How so?
Well, from a strict legal compliance standpoint, you're entirely right.
Right.
The corporation remitted the funds, so the customs authority returns the funds to the corporation. But economically, we're essentially operating in a two-tiered system.
Okay.
Economic costs always run downhill. When expenses go up, businesses just let gravity take over, and the weight falls entirely on the consumer. But legal refunds.
They run uphill.
Exactly. They run uphill, they defy economic gravity, and stop dead at the corporate ledger. The Supreme Court didn't rule on economic fairness here. They ruled on statutory customs definitions.
Right.
So the legal system works flawlessly if you have the capital to hire appellate lawyers to argue at the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, the consumer who actually bore the crushing weight of that 3.3% inflation spike, they just paid the higher grocery bills and moved on.
Wow. Costs run downhill, refunds run uphill. So corporations are basically demanding their tax money back using these really tight interpretations of legal fairness. But what about the trade revenues that don't get refunded? The customs fees that actually stay in the Treasury?
Oh, this is where it gets really interesting.
Because you'd think those funds would be utilized for, national infrastructure or something. But right now, we are seeing them aggressively targeted for this massive vanity project that is completely redefining the English language.
Yeah, we are. This is genuinely one of the most remarkable pivots in political messaging we've seen this entire year.
So set the scene for us.
So for months now, the administration has been pushing this proposal to build a 90,000 square foot ballroom on the White House grounds for President Trump.
90,000 square feet. That's huge.
It's massive. It's a huge structural addition, and the price tag is pegged at roughly $400 million. Now, the official framing from the administration, and we heard this repeated constantly by press secretaries and advisors, was that this is a magnificent gift to the nation.
Right.
They explicitly promised it would be entirely privately funded. They said not a single dime of taxpayer money would be used.
That was the promise right up until this week. But now, according to our second source, GOP Senators Lindsey Graham, Katie Britt, and Eric Schmitt just introduced new legislation. And this bill routes $332 million in taxpayer money to build this exact same ballroom.
Yep.
And the bill legally sources that money straight from customs fees collected on imported goods.
And Senator Graham's defense of this pivot was pretty incredible. He stated that, well, the remaining portion of that $400 million price tag will still come from private donors.
But taxpayers are picking up 83% of it.
Right. He clarified that the private money is just going to cover things like, and this is a, quote, buying China, stuff like that.
Unbelievable. And they also rolled out a brand new justification for spending public money on this, right?
They did. The legislation claims the ballroom is now a necessary enhancement to presidential security. They are pointing to a shooting incident that just happened near the White House Correspondents' Dinner over the weekend as the reason.
But the contradiction there is staggering. The project went from being a completely privately funded gift to suddenly asking the public to cover 83% of the structural construction costs overnight.
Yeah. And that security justification, it's drawing some really intense scrutiny from architectural and security experts.
Why is that?
Because the White House already has multiple highly secure venues for formal events. The East Room, the State Dining Room, these are heavily fortified spaces. None of those existing structures required a retroactive security justification to explain away a $332 million invoice.
It's exactly like having a roommate who insists on buying a massive, state-of-the-art home theater system for your shared apartment room.
Oh, I know where this is going.
They swear up and down, oh, it's a private contribution to the household, it's totally on me. But then at the end of the month, they take 83% of the theater's cost straight out of the shared rent fund.
Yeah.
And when you confront them, they say, well, I personally paid for the Netflix login and the HDMI cables, so technically I still made a private contribution. It just completely warps the definition of the phrase privately funded.
Really does.
But wait, let me just challenge the premise of the outrage for a second. Customs fees are just these kind of boring, bureaucratic revenue streams. Isn't it possible that using customs fees is just a standard way to fund federal buildings? Maybe that original privately funded claim was just, naive optimism about construction costs.
Well, customs fees are a federal revenue stream, sure. But let's be really clear about what a customs fee actually is. It is a tax. It's a tax levied by the government.
Right.
So spending customs fees on a White House ballroom is federal spending on a White House ballroom. You could use those exact same customs fees to, repair an interstate highway or fund a VA hospital.
Mm-hmm.
It is taxpayer money. And the argument that this is just standard operating procedure, that is exactly what is fracturing the Republican Party from the inside right now.
Really? So what does this mean for the lawmakers caught in the middle of this? Because this isn't just a traditional partisan fight where the Democrats are the only ones complaining.
Not at all. You have Senator Rick Scott of Florida, who is a staunch fiscal conservative and historically a very loyal ally to the president.
Yeah.
He came out fiercely against this bill within hours of it being introduced. His argument is rooted entirely in math and recent political history. The national debt is sitting at historic highs.
Yeah.
Congress just went through these agonizing debt ceiling debates where fiscal conservatives were demanding strict spending cuts.
Right. They just fought a huge battle over that.
Exactly. So Scott is arguing that authorizing $332 million in brand new federal spending for a ballroom violently contradicts the fiscal discipline that the party just campaigned on.
Yeah.
He isn't even debating whether the room would be nice to have. He's just looking at the ledger.
But not everyone in the party agrees with him.
Oh, no. Meanwhile, you've got House Republicans like Randy Fine of Florida and Lauren Boebert of Colorado heavily leaning into the project. They're actively circulating their own, even more aggressive versions of the ballroom legislation in the lower chamber.
Wow. So it creates this massive trap for fiscal conservatives.
It really does.
Because that original privately funded narrative was basically a shield. It protected them from having to defend the spending to their constituents back home.
Exactly.
But now that Graham, Britt, and Schmitt have officially put an invoice on the public's desk, every fiscal conservative has to make a very uncomfortable public choice. They have to choose between their stated bedrock principles on the national debt and throwing their support behind a highly visible $400 million vanity project for a sitting president.
It is the ultimate purity test of loyalty versus fiscal policy.
It really is.
Which is actually a perfect segue into the final layer of this transactional mindset we're looking at today.
Right. So we've seen how billions of dollars in trade revenues and the definitions of federal spending are basically being twisted for political leverage.
Yeah.
But our final source shows that this transactional behavior is no longer just confined to balance sheets and construction projects. It is bleeding directly into the highest levels of the criminal justice system, specifically regarding the ongoing Jeffrey Epstein investigation.
And the details here are incredibly dark.
Yeah.
But understanding the political mechanics at play is just vital.
Okay, lay out the facts for us.
So, Ghislaine Maxwell is currently sitting in a federal prison. She's serving a 20-year sentence for child sex trafficking after being convicted as Jeffrey Epstein's primary accomplice. Now, the House Oversight Committee has been attempting to run this sprawling investigation into Epstein's broader, shadowy network of associates.
Right, they want to know who else was involved.
Exactly. So they formally invited Maxwell to testify back in February. She appeared, immediately invoked her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and provided absolutely nothing to the committee.
Nothing at all. And the investigation has basically been stalling ever since, right?
It has. Lawmakers are frustrated. Attorney General Pam Bondi is actually under subpoena right now regarding how the Justice Department handled related files. The committee is just desperate for a breakthrough.
And Maxwell knows that.
Oh, she definitely does. Recognizing this desperation, Maxwell's attorney, David Oscar Marcus, has put a formal proposal on the congressional table. He claims Maxwell is now completely willing to speak fully and honestly about the entire network.
She's offering up everything.
Everything. The names, the timelines, the complete account that the committee has been hunting for years.
But there's a price.
There is a massive price. The asking price is a full presidential pardon from Donald Trump.
A full pardon. And Representative James Comer, the Republican chairman of the House Oversight Committee, actually publicly confirmed that a lot of GOP members are very open to making this exact trade.
Yeah, he did.
Though, to be fair, Comer himself is totally against it. He publicly admitted that the optics are disastrous, and he called Maxwell the worst person in the entire investigation, second only to Epstein.
Yeah, and at least 8 of the 26 Republicans on the committee have joined Comer in saying they will not support a pardon under any circumstances.
But the fact that the chairman was forced to publicly acknowledge the intense pressure coming from his own caucus, that confirms this isn't just some fringe backroom idea. This is a live debate in Washington right now.
It is a very live debate.
Yeah.
And House Democrats, led by Ranking Member Robert Garcia, they are fully united against the proposal. They're condemning it as an absolute insult to the survivors who spent years agonizingly building the legal case that finally put her behind bars.
Yeah, but here's where it gets really interesting. Let me play devil's advocate. If a congressional committee is staring at a massive, basically impenetrable criminal network, and the only way to expose the dark reality of that network is to cut a deal with the person sitting at the very center of it, isn't that just standard law enforcement? I mean, we watch federal prosecutors give mob bosses deals to flip on bigger targets all the time. Why is trading a pardon for Maxwell's testimony any different from a standard everyday plea deal?
That is the core argument being used by the people supporting this trade. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the distinction between a structured plea deal and a presidential pardon is basically the difference between a legally binding contract and a magic wand.
A magic wand. Explain that.
So a plea deal, or a formal immunity agreement, is a highly structured mechanism. It is heavily monitored by the judicial branch. If a federal prosecutor cuts a deal with a mob underboss, that deal comes with a massive list of strict conditions, and it's overseen by a judge.
Okay, so there are rules.
Lots of rules. The underboss usually has to sit through rigorous proffer sessions. And here's the key. If they lie, if they're evasive, or if they selectively protect certain allies while throwing others under the bus, the prosecutor can simply revoke the agreement.
Oh, I see.
The deal is torn up, and the criminal goes right back to their prison cell. There is a built-in accountability mechanism to guarantee the government actually gets the truth it paid for.
But a presidential pardon operates completely outside of all those judicial safeguards.
Completely outside. A presidential pardon is a unilateral executive act. It possesses zero accountability mechanisms, and it is absolute.
Wow.
If Donald Trump uses his executive authority to grant Ghislaine Maxwell clemency, she is immediately released from federal custody. Period.
So if she gets out, sits before the Oversight Committee, and just delivers totally evasive, incomplete testimony.
Or if she strategically curates her answers to protect powerful individuals while naming others, the committee has no recourse whatsoever.
Because the government can't unpardon her.
Exactly. They cannot unpardon her. Her 20-year federal trafficking sentence is permanently erased, and the committee has surrendered 100% of its leverage for a promise she no longer has to keep.
That's incredible. They aren't asking for a structured legal agreement where she actually has to earn her freedom through verified cooperation. They're asking for the ultimate executive override. They're just, crossing their fingers and hoping a convicted trafficker keeps her word after she is already a free woman.
Yeah.
It essentially treats a hard-won federal conviction for child sex trafficking as just another expendable bargaining chip on a political table.
And this raises a profound question about the message Congress is debating sending to the justice system. I mean, think about the survivors who bravely testified, the jury of citizens that convicted her, the career prosecutors who meticulously built the case.
Yeah.
Their entire concept of justice is being weighed against political leverage.
Yeah.
The logic driving the lawmakers who support this trade is purely transactional. We want information. She holds the monopoly on that information, so let's buy it with her freedom.
The pattern across all three of these April 2026 reports is just unmistakable.
It really is.
The rules are changing right before our eyes, and it is completely dependent on who is holding the chips.
Huh.
I mean, we're looking at $166 billion in tariff refunds where massive corporations get paid out through legal loopholes, while everyday consumers just swallow the inflation.
Yep.
We're looking at a $332 million invoice for a White House ballroom that magically morphed from a privately funded gift into a taxpayer burden using customs taxes.
Right.
And we are looking at a serious congressional debate over trading a federal trafficking sentence for political testimony. We are witnessing a moment where the fundamental rules of justice, national finance, and federal infrastructure are no longer fixed principles. They are entirely negotiable transactions.
It's a profound shift in how governance operates.
Yeah.
And honestly, it leaves us with a really critical, lingering thought to examine.
What is that?
If policy, infrastructure, and even the criminal justice system are increasingly viewed purely as transactions, where every outcome is simply a negotiation of leverage, what happens to the citizens who don't have leverage?
That is the question.
Right. If you don't have billions of dollars to lobby the Supreme Court and you don't have high-profile secrets to trade for your freedom, how do you participate in this system? Will everyday voters eventually be forced to form massive legal corporations or literal leverage unions just to have their basic rights recognized by the government? If Washington only responds to transactional power, where does that leave you?
Wow. That is the exact question we all need to be asking right now as we watch these deals unfold. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. Taking these massive, complex dynamics and figuring out how they actually impact your life is exactly what this deep dive is all about. We'll see you next time.